Being able to sew on a button is a skill that everyone should know how to do. Most likely sometime in your life you're going to have a button come off your shirt, and putting another one on is the simplest thing ever. I'm Jan Howell from YouMakeItSimple.com, and in this sewing tutorial I'm going to show you how to sew on a button using a hand sewing method and give you some great tips and tricks on how to make this task easier and professional looking. So without any further ado, let's get started. I'm going to show you 3 different methods: a 4-hole button, a 2-hole button, and a shank button. You'll need a needle and some thread, a pair of scissors. I have double threaded my needle. I'm going to knot the end, and a really easy way to do that is to wrap the thread around your finger and just gently roll it between your fingers and then pull it, and that will give you a knot at the end. As you can see, my thread doesn't need to be very long. Let's start with that 2-hole button. Most things that have a button on them will be double layered fabric. If you're replacing a button on a shirt, figure out where the button needs to be. Sometimes you'll see the thread still there, or you can bring the shirt over the top and stick your needle down the middle of the buttonhole into the fabric, and you can mark that with a pin so that your button is centered where it needs to be. I'm going to apply the needle from the back side to the front, and you'll want to use a coordinating color of thread with your button if you don't want the threads to show, but I'm using a dark color so that you can see the stitching easily. I'm going to go up through that first hole. Again, make sure it's where it needs to be, and then I'm going to put the needle back down into that second hole, and before I pull it all the way through, take the toothpick, put it underneath that loop so that thread is looped over the toothpick, so that when you finish sewing it, it will give a little space under the button so it can go through the buttonhole and lay nice and even. We're just going to go back underneath, up through the front, through that first hole again, and we're going to make 3 passes. And you can flip it over to see where that needs to go if you need to. I'm going to remove the toothpick and see how there's a little bit of space there. Take the needle and insert it back into the fabric between. We're not going to go up through the button again. And then I'm going to wrap the thread around that shaft of thread 3 times. Take a little stitch, and before I pull it all the way through, stick it in the loop, wrap the needle around the thread a couple times, and then pull it, and that will create a knot right at the base. And then I'll stick it back down right where all the stitching is. Come to the back side and take another little stitch and make another knot. And then you can clip your thread. Now for that 4-hole method, very similar. Come in from the back side, apply it through one of those holes. Now there's a couple ways that you can sew a 4-hole. You can go crisscrossing, making a cross, or you can make 2 parallel lines. I'm going to show you the crisscross method. So I'm going to cross over to the diagonal to the other hole, pull it, and before I pull it all the way through, I'm going to apply the toothpick. I'm going to come to the next hole to the side of the hole I just went down, come back up, and cross it over to the other hole. I'm going to make 3 passes on each diagonal. Coming back to that first hole, back over, there's 2. Remove the toothpick, pull it up, stick my needle back into the fabric at the base of the stitching. I'm going to wrap my thread around the shaft 3 times. And then take a little stitch, make that knot. And for this kind of button, find your location, knot your thread, come in from the back side, come back up and through. Since this is a little bit of a heavier duty button, I'm going to do like 6 passes just to secure that in place because this loop is pretty big. I want to make sure that that doesn't come off. All you'll need to do is knot the back. And clip your thread. Pretty simple. Now a few tips about buttons. Most of you probably already know this, but some of you may not. On your button-up shirts, most likely on the side seam where the tag is, they will include an extra button. Because if you have a button come off, sometimes it's kind of tricky, even if you have a jar like this full of buttons. Sometimes it's hard to find one that's similar in shape and has the same number of buttonholes. So you can clip that off and apply it to your shirt. Another tip about needles and threads that I like to share is when you have a needle, instead of putting it in your pincushion, because most of the time after a bit they work their way down into the pincushion where you can't even see the head of it, and they're hard to locate and you'll poke your finger on the other side. I like to keep a few of these threaded needles on my bulletin board and a place to store your needles. I love these little tins to store some of my needles in. If you enjoyed that and found that helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment in the comment section below if you have any questions. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Click on the bell in your notifications so you can be notified when I put new things up. If you're new to sewing or want to brush up on your sewing skills, check out my Sew Simple courses and my pattern designs on youmakeitsimple.com. I hope this simple sewing skill can come in handy for you someday. Have a wonderful day and we'll see you next time.